Hi YouTube, the Reefer here. This is a video series about my 93-gallon Marineland Cube reef tank. I've been in and out of freshwater aquarium hobby for multiple years, and I found my interest to be waning a bit. I was in Vancouver, BC, checking out aquarium shops, and ended up at this one shop called J&L Aquatics. I didn't realize at the time that J&L focused mainly on saltwater, but once I was there, it took a lot of whining from my brother-in-law before I was willing to leave. There was just something magical about seeing all the live coral, the fish, and anemones hosting clownfish. After that day, I did some serious research into what was required to start a saltwater tank, and started looking out for sales or deals. My break came later that year, when I found a posting for a 93-gallon Marineland Cube tank. The following was included in the entire package: the tank, the stand, including plumbing, a trigger system sump, a return pump, a Kessel A360 wide-angle light, a screen to keep the fish in, an Apex Junior, and a Toonsy auto top-off, as well as a bunch of other odds and ends as the guy was getting out of fish altogether. So he wanted $900 for this package, and with my sweet bargaining skills, I talked him down to $800. Yeah, definitely need to work on those skills. Especially because the stand, which I highly valued, couldn't fit through my narrow doorways. Burn! That being said, there were a lot of good things I liked about this package. A 93-gallon tank with a sump meant I was going to start with a good volume of water, and I would have to worry less about swings in alk and salinity, as well as any potential ammonia or nitrite poisoning. A large volume of water would also have greater waste dilution properties. It already had a light that was selling for a lot of money. However, little did I realize, most LEDs are very expensive. They also do not cover the largest area and can suffer from degradation. The item I was least excited about was the Apex, and I almost did not set it up, and I have to say now my Apex is my favorite tool out of everything I have on that setup. So with the deal decided, I drove to Vernon, BC and picked up everything. I guess my first clue that the stand was not going to fit through my doorway was when he suggested we had to use a window to get the stand out. Anyways, I wasn't thinking. When I finally got home, I realized and I had a real conundrum on my hands. I tried to think of every possible way I could get that stand into my fish room, and I finally had to settle for building a new stand. So right there, I had already kind of overpaid for this setup because I did place value on this stand. Anyways, that's a lesson learned. One of the things that my wife asked me to do was to make sure that the stand could actually fit through our doorways, which meant I could only make a stand that was 28 inches tall. I really regret making such a short stand, because other than putting the heater in there and having a small light to try to grow some Chaeto, I can't use the sump for anything else. It is way too short for me to fit a protein skimmer in there. I've even tried to fit some extra rock I had, and I just couldn't do it. So if you're ever going to build your own stand, or order a custom stand, make sure it is tall enough. So I got my stand built probably around August 18th, and I proceeded to get it filled up, to fill the tank up with water after I did all the plumbing. So the tank was completely filled with water on August 21st of 2017. And that very night I put in my first coral. So you have to understand, I was a complete noob. It had basically taken me over a month to get the stand set up, the tank filled with water, all my plumbing done. All I wanted to do was to get some coral. And of course, weeks before the day I filled the tank, there was a woman in a city nearby that had shut down her reef tank, and her corals had been on sale for weeks. So by the time I got to her place, it was pretty slim pickings. Now, being an amateur reef keeper, or amateur reefer, I wanted everything. In fact, I was not deterred at all when now what I think of as a 95% empty tank back then was as good as 100% full tank. Now, I'm not proud of this because I truly try not to lie, but she knew I was new and she asked how long my tank had been cycling for, and I told her it had been about 2 weeks. And she asked, well, how do you know it's cycled? Now, of course, it wasn't cycled. But based on my research, now coral don't have the same issues with ammonia and nitrites as fish. Furthermore, all I was buying from her were a handful of tiny zoas and some mushrooms, and she sold me a couple leather coral. So I was not concerned at all about ammonia and nitrites. You guys, for those of you listening and you're starting out a tank, just be mindful that the ammonia and nitrites affect fish much more than coral. And when I say coral, I'm not talking about SPS, but for zoas and the leathers, I do not have any problems whatsoever with them. So I ended up getting the following from her. I got 2 frags of pink pallies. They do look like a variant of Armor of God pallies, but because I can't be sure of what their source or origin is, I've always just called them pink pallies. Some really interesting orange zoas. Now these guys were really tiny. They were on a frag with an encrusting coral on it, and she called it a bonus. So after the coral started growing, I realized it was a Pocillopora. Now, because all I had was the Kessel A360 back then, I can't truly tell what the true color of that coral was. Now, a big reason for this is because the A360 is missing some spectrums that a lot of the later models of LEDs carry. I think specifically the royal blue, it probably doesn't have the violet. So things like purples, reds, and pinks were much duller, or in some cases even appeared brown to me. So this Pocillopora, it looked brown to me. It was also encrusting over my orange zoas. So as a new reefer, I wanted to control everything. And that was the first time I fragged. I fragged my orange zoas off. And then the Pocillopora, I read about the polyp billout that they often experience. So I actually got rid of it. In hindsight, I should probably have kept it. I think it would have been interesting to see how it would have developed over time. But hindsight's 2020, and I can always get another frag in the future. So I also got from this woman 3 blue mushrooms, a Kenya tree coral, and a colt coral. So she was really nice about everything. I'm sure she could tell I was lying, but she didn't say anything. And yeah, she gave me the coral for a good price. She even bagged some sand out of her tank for me to help seed my tank with some good life forms. So I was really thankful to her. And although at the time I had planned on having a bare bottom tank, I actually did empty her bag of sand into my tank. So when I got home and I was, I guess, unpacking the coral and getting it ready to put into my tank, so acclimating them, I noticed there were some hitchhikers, some brittle stars, and bristleworms. Now again, because I was new, I killed the worms because all my reading on the forums really freaked me out. In hindsight, I ended up getting bristleworms anyways, and I'm really thankful for having them as part of my cleanup crew. The small babies are currently living in my sand, and at least they're making sure that the food that fall into my sand is being broken down. And the thing with any type of cleanup crew that eats and they grow or they reproduce, you know, this growth is actually removing nutrients out of your tank. The same with having a ton of babies. Like, there are a lot of baby bristleworms in my tank right now. And the great thing about these guys is I know that they are actually exporting nutrients. So the only thing you have to remember is the final step in exporting nutrients is actually removing guys that have gotten too big. So the brittle stars are great as well, and I believe they do feed on detritus as well, and they are great. They're a good part of your cleanup crew. So I still have brittle stars to this day, and that was about a year ago, so they must be doing pretty well in my tank. So moving on, those were my first coral. About 4 days later, on August 25th, I drove down to Vancouver, BC, and to stay for 2 nights before coming back. And on the way down there, I picked up the red dragon coral and a green elkhorn frag. I stayed in Vancouver for 2 nights, and this is at the end of summer. Temperatures are fluctuating between the low teens at night and probably the mid-20s during the day. And all I had these frags in was a little freezer box. You know, one of those little cooler boxes where you're supposed to put some ice in. Anyways, while I was down there, I also picked up my first fish, which was a pair of clownfish. A regular, not special, just a regular pair of pergola clownfish. And also a rock with some green hairy mushrooms. So the last thing I picked up was from a reefer that sells high-end SPS frags in North Vancouver. Now, I wasn't crazy enough to dole out big bucks for the SPS he was selling, but he happened to have a chalice coral that I was willing to give a try. So he called this the Alien Eye Chalice. It's got a blue body with pink highlights and yellow mouths, and its growing area is green. So it's a really nice coral, and it didn't do anything for, I would say, the first 8 months of its existence in my tank. But in the last 4 months, it's really grown quite a bit, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how it's gonna develop. So after the 2 days, I drove home and stuck the coral in my tank. Now, would you be surprised to learn that the red dragon probably RTN'd in the little sandwich baggie sometime in the 2 days? When I placed it in the tank, I remember it did have a bit of red on it, so it was probably still alive. But by the following night, it was gone. It was bone white. Back then I didn't realize, but it was dead. So the green elkhorn was a trooper. So I spent 2 days in that leaky sandwich bag with no heat pack, in those fluctuating temps. And when I put it in my tank, I remember it looked amazing under the actinic lights of the A360. So I was really stunned by its like beautiful green fluorescence. And I did notice some dark, almost black spots near the base of the skeleton, but I didn't think much of it at that time. Within a week I realized it was spreading, and based on my reading, I believe it was slow tissue necrosis. So I panicked and I did what I think, looking back on it, was definitely the right thing. I fragged as much of the healthy tissue as I could, and then I glued them to little pieces of Marco rock because that was all I had. And you know, after about a month of them not doing anything, I just stopped paying attention. So what I didn't realize at the time is that most or all SPS like to encrust first before actually growing. So it was about 6 months later when I realized that the entire rock was encrusted, and now the branches were thickening and growing. To this day, it is one of my favorite coral, and I love its growth patterns. Anyways, thanks guys. That's it for part 1. Please like the video if you liked it, subs if you loved it, and don't forget to sub and turn on notifications so that you don't miss part 2.